Hello, folks. Welcome to the Pandamonium Podcast, where we discuss everything from the unexplained, paranormal, and downright weird to gaming and real-world issues. My name is Sam, and as always, guys, this is an adult podcast, so there's going to be sensitive subjects, language, the works. I'm here with my co-host Wyatt, and today I kind of thought that I would discuss something that's piqued my interest as of late. It's part of the unexplained territory. So for those of you who don't know or may not have heard about this particular incident and this individual, there was a gentleman by the name of Christopher Case that died in April of 1991. They found him in his Seattle apartment. Now, the interesting thing about him was that when he had died, he was in his mid-30s. And he was at the peak physical condition. He was very active, went to the gym, did a lot of protein supplements, lots of healthy foods. So he was fit. He was athletic. Now, the coroner pronounced him dead due to heart failure, which those who knew him disagreed with that assessment, mainly because he was in, like I said, top physical shape. There wasn't any history of heart conditions in his family. So a bit about him. He was a young executive of a media company. He had just gotten that gig in his late 20s. And so he was basically at the top. He was living the dream. He was making good money. He was in high spirits. And those who hung out with him often described him as being sort of a electric persona. He was always very happy, talkative, friendly. Now, during a particular engagement on a weekend, he was at some kind of function. I think it was with his company. But what happened was, while he was there, he met with this woman who was very attractive. Much older than him. She was in her 40s, I believe. And I cannot recall what her name is at this moment, but she seemed very, very into him, to the point where him being as much of a dignified individual, a man of honor as he was, while he was flattered that such a attractive woman was clearly into him, he made it clear that he thought that they should just keep it as a friendly sort of, talk, because he was a little bit put off by her asking him questions if he was into the paranormal, if he knew anything about witchcraft, that sort of thing. She was very odd, coming off to him very odd. So he kind of backed away. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened after that, she didn't take kindly to his rejection. So she had allegedly come out to him, told him that he wasn't going to make it past a week.
Oh, wow.
So she insinuated that she was going to put a curse on him of some sort. Mm-hmm. So him being a man of rational thought, he kind of blew it off as her being a little bit, nuts, and he didn't give it a second thought. So 2 days passed, nothing happened. Third day, nothing happened. However, that night, at his home, he started hearing thumps, things moving around, footsteps, your standard run-of-the-mill paranormal things. At first, he thought that it was a rat. Rats in his apartment. Rats are fairly common in the mainland. Mm-hmm. So that's where his mind automatically went to. However, while the night progressed, as he went to sleep, apparently what happened, and if I'm recalling this correctly, he started hearing voices, overlapping voices in his head. Whispers, languages he didn't understand, and that caused him to jump up, and while he stood up awake, he still heard them. And he couldn't pinpoint where the voices were coming from. So, what happened was, he had a friend by the name of Sammy Soder, who she lived in North Carolina at this time. But he called her up that evening and left her scratching her head and worried, because basically what he said to her was, "They're after me." And he left her a message saying, "I am very afraid, extremely afraid. I could die from this." He was obviously very rattled at this point. So she had tried to contact him after that point, because upon hearing this, message, she got naturally worried, couldn't get a hold of him. And what happened then was that on his end, it's like he changed into a whole different person. He went to this shop that specialized in religious artifacts, sort of like a store that dealt with, you could buy crucifixes, different types of oils, sage, that kind of thing. So he went in trying to buy up as many crucifixes as he could. Now this is a man, folks, that was not particularly religious. I mean, he was spiritual, but he was not particularly religious. And he was also of sound mind. He was not someone that even had any inclination to look into the paranormal field prior to this.
Okay.
So he bought up these crucifixes. He asked the store owner what he should do. He told him about what was going on. The guy said, put these crucifixes up in your apartment. Put salt. Salt is seen as a natural barrier. And then light candles. And so what he did was, he did exactly that. He went home, put crucifixes all around his house, lit candles. Anyway, what ended up happening was, his friend had tried to contact him. Calling him, no answer. This is about like a week at this point. I think a week or so. Nobody had seen him. Nobody had heard from him. Now, when someone finally went to go check on him, they found that he was dead, with no apparent sign of struggle. There wasn't any breaking and entering. The coroner's report, as I stated before, said that he had died from acute heart failure. However, the people he had contacted during that time say that he had become so unraveled. His persona had completely changed. He couldn't sleep. He refused to sleep. He kept saying that they're after me, they're coming after me. I can hear them, I can feel them. And then, according to his own account, from one of the people that he had conversed with prior to his death, he said that he started to see these black sort of figures around his room, and one in particular that would stand and stare at him. Not move, but just stare at him.
Okay.
So the lady that he had, met at that function, apparently she seemed to have specific interest in Egyptian mythology, because that was one of the things they were discussing at the party. He was kind of into different mythos. He found all that kind of stuff fascinating. So that's what caused them to strike up conversation in the first place. They had a similar interest, and so she was kind of taken with that. That here was this handsome fellow that had the same sort of interest as she did. But after this case surfaced, people who knew about it, also who lived in the area, there's a lot of speculation going on. One of the initial theories was, well, maybe he lived a double life that nobody knew about. Maybe he was on some kind of drug. Maybe, but a lot of people kind of discounted that because it's like I said, he was physically, in his prime. He went out to the gym a lot. And another theory that that people did put forward was maybe it was the supplements. Maybe it was the protein supplements, things like that. Because it is known that some of these health food stuff, they do have a lot of additives in it. They do have, like hexane, which is used in petroleum products, by the way. Whey protein is also not that great for you, especially if you have, like I do, lactose intolerance. But the coroner did not find any sign of suicide. It being any. It wasn't suicide. Yeah, it was not suicide, and there wasn't any evidence present that linked his sudden heart attack to any kind of supplement. Any kind of chemical.
He didn't have any drugs in his system.
No drugs in his system. They ran a full toxicology. It all came back normal. So, the police, initially they did think that someone had come in, broken into his apartment, but they didn't find any telltale signs of that. They looked at, could he have possibly have made any enemies? No, the guy was very likable. He was very soft-spoken but friendly. He didn't make any enemies. And like I said, he was living good, living comfortably. He was an executive at a media company, so he was doing good for himself. So immediately then, the tone took a much darker turn, with rumors being whispered that maybe there was in fact a curse that was placed on him by this lady. Because, number one, like I said, she was much older than him. Number two, she seemed to be asking him questions about things that kind of put him off.
Right.
And then when she said that you won't make it, you won't make it past, when she gave him a date, basically, that he was supposed to die, that's when he, he tried to run away, from her. Now, she didn't stalk him. She was not a stalker. But he ran because not only of how she reacted when he rejected her, but also with her statement saying, "Oh, you're gonna die," because of that.
And it doesn't sound like she was giving him a psychic reading. It sounds like there was a curse.
Yeah, and so in the realm of the paranormal, you do come across certain stories, some documented, some could be chalked up to hearsay, but you do come across instances where things kind of seem to be too coincidental. Things that really give you pause to, maybe consider that there is something going on here.
Yes.
Because there's too many things that line up, a sequence of events that are just too perfect to lead up to something happening. I mean, look at James Dean's car, the little bastard. And James Dean, he died, when he was very young as well. But he loved racing. He loved racing. And he had purchased this car, little bastard. And at the time, it had a top speed of 140 miles per hour. But interestingly enough, the films that he had been working on, 2 of which basically had to do with car accidents, ironically enough. One in which he played a character that I believe his car ran a red light or something and hit another car and killed someone. So that was one of his last films before his car, little bastard, actually, they got into an accident and he died like an hour later from his injuries. And then collectors who tried to purchase that car after his death each had strange things happen to them whenever they tried to get close to the car.
Yeah.
One of which, I forget what his name was, but he is the gentleman that worked on the original Batmobile from the original Batman. He's well known throughout the hot rod community, but what he did is he purchased the car, and while one of his mechanics was working on the car, the engine somehow slipped and broke both of his legs.
Wow.
That was just one instance, and there was a bunch of others, that happened after that. So the whole thing is you do come across events that seem to suggest that there could be some kind of curse involved. Now, whether that curse is placed there from another person, or if it's just...
Or prediction.
Yeah, or if it's just that the object in question draws some, so it's like a magnet of negative energy. So with this gentleman, though, I'm inclined to believe that this individual, this shady woman, she may have had, in fact, dabbled in witchcraft.
Black magic.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at her, questions that she had been asking him, they were all very oddly specific. She seemed to know a lot about the field that she was talking to him about. And she was so inexplicably enthralled with him. Like, she was just all over him at this function, which is really odd.
Like she was looking for a victim, maybe.
Right, exactly. So, it's one of these things that to this day, there hasn't really been a unanimous agreement in the community, as well as the coroner's report and the news, the people that covered the story at the time. There's not really a unanimous sort of agreement as to what happened to this guy.
And you said she was into the Egyptian religion, not voodoo?
No.
So was this also happens in the voodoo religion, which originated in Haiti, but this sounds like more of the Egyptian, and there's positive and negative to both, the black magic. Also, people that give predictions has been known through the centuries. Nostradamus, for example, had a vision of seeing the image of a swastika and mass destruction. So there's been a lot of famous, I don't know what you would call it, psychics or people, visionaries, that have seen visions of the future. But this is more of a curse, which is more of a darker subject.
Yeah. And it's very eerie when you come across incidents like this, where there's been someone that has been victimized, and ultimately a subject of unexplainable death, because it's like, when a police, it's like, okay, when a police department gets called in to investigate a case or investigate a possible, what they're going in is, assuming is a suicide or homicide. Then they come across a scene where there's no sign at all of anybody else having been present. And when they look into the individual and their background, they find no signs of any kind of psychological disorder, any kind of depression, any hint that this person may have thought of committing suicide, and then they're just left with a corpse and no logical explanation as to how it got there.
Sometimes people can be hypnotized to believe that something's going to happen, and that could cause death also. And that's used in the voodoo thing. I've heard stuff like that, where some of the curses also could be like a sort of hypnotism that caused, say, the body to physically die or do something. Because we know with hypnotists that it is real. If you ever go on YouTube and watch people that work as hypnotists, yes, there are fake ones, but some of them you watch, and like one I saw where this hypnotist said, okay, now you're going to have an orgasm 1,000 times stronger than you've ever had. And believe it or not, everybody dropped to the ground, literally fell like a rock. It wasn't a voluntary fall. They weren't acting. They literally just dropped like a rock and started seizuring on the ground.
Now the thing is, though, with hypnotists is that, or with that particular instance, some people can say, well, that's what happens when you have the power of suggestion. Like that human psyche is incredibly susceptible to all kinds of subliminal messaging. We see it all the time. We see it with infomercials on TV. You see it when you go to the movie theaters and they have that, that little thing that plays in the beginning that shows have an ice cold Coke, and they make it look really visually appealing in order to activate the parts of your brain that desire that kind of...
Same with the alcohol commercials, how the liquor is actually computer animated and you see them like pouring liquor into a glass. Yeah. That's not real.
Yeah.
Most of the time that's computer animated.
Yeah, so that's the thing, though, is that with that hypnotic, session, it's like that could be that people were, that they allowed themselves to be, that they may not have actually been hypnotized, but they were unwittingly, allowing themselves to be sort of...
the power of influence.
Yeah. Now, I just want to say, and I pulled this up, but here is a brief article here. And I'll also tell you guys, if you want to hear the whole story really in depth, go to YouTube, look up a channel called Bedtime Stories. He does incredible content. All of it is on actual real world stuff that actually happened. Very eerie stuff, and he goes in depth on this story.
What's the name of this particular video?
So, this isn't a video. This is a article relating to what I was talking about the Christopher case.
But the bedtime channel, you were
referencing. Yeah. So I'll when I upload this, I'll include a link to his channel. Highly recommend it. Subscribe it if you're into that kind of stuff. scary things, unexplainable things, whatever. So here is an article, and it says, acute myocarditis, put plainly, heart failure. That's what the medical examiner said had killed Christopher Case. But he'd been fit and healthy, and as far as anyone knew, he'd never smoked or taken drugs. He didn't even drink, yet he was dead at 35. Sometimes it happens, it's a tragedy, but even the hearts of the fittest young athletes can give out suddenly, often as a result of an unknown underlying genetic heart condition. However, there was no history of heart problems in Christopher's family. And there was something else strange about his death. He'd known it was coming. It was April 1991. Christopher Case believed he had only a week left to live, and he was frantic. "They're after me," he told his friend Sammy Soder in North Carolina on the phone from his Seattle flat. "I am very, very afraid, extremely afraid. I could die from this." Then Christopher called another friend in North Carolina, also telling her he feared for his life. No one heard from Christopher Case again. Worried, his friends contacted the Seattle police, who went to Christopher's flat. The door was locked, and there was no answer. Returning the next day, this time the door was open, and police found Christopher dead in his flat. He was fully dressed, stretched out in his empty bathtub. Around him were the remains of 10 burnt-out candles, crucifixes on every surface. Salt had been poured along the bases of the walls and door frames and made into a geometric pattern by the flat's entrance. Now, let me just explain here that to people in the paranormal field, salt is seen as a barrier, as a defense, but it also is a tool that's used to determine or to detect any sort of entity that's present. A lot of times you'll either see salt or powder being used, where investigators will sprinkle a bunch of salt in an area or flour, and then they'll be able to see if footprints will actually show up. So salt is sort of a tool that investigators use, but it's also in the more occult sense, or more that sort of.
It's also used in.
It's in a lot of rituals. A lot of rituals
use it as well. Even here in Hawaii, I've heard people say they put salt around the 4 corners of their house.
Right. And so a lot of times, it's like I said, it's used as barriers. So that could be why Christopher had used salt in his apartment, and why he had laid it out everywhere, was to try and either keep the spirits away from him, or keep them sealed in a particular area so that they couldn't,
obviously it
get
didn't
in.
work, because it seemed like he died.
Right. But something killed him. The whole point here is that something killed him, and it was not his own heart, at least from, not from what his genetic history was.
The stress from the experience.
Right. And that is one of the lingering theories about his death, is that did he scare himself to death, literally? But then again, what could have caused a man that was otherwise very level-headed, that did not have any interest in the paranormal whatsoever,
right,
that was making good money, that was living a comfortable life,
right,
what really could have caused him to suddenly become so different so quickly? That's the whole thing here. So it goes on to say, there were books in the flat about witchcraft, the occult, and black magic. So he had bought these books and was obviously
studying.
Something spurred him into looking into this shit. And letters Christopher had written but never sent. In them, he claimed he'd been put under a curse. When an autopsy was done, no evidence was found of foul play, but police investigators looked further into Christopher's personal life, and it was then that they found something startling. So, in the months before his death, Christopher had gone on a business trip to San Francisco. He was an artist's manager at a Seattle-based music company. But his passion was the music of the ancient world. And while he was in San Francisco, he met a young woman who claimed she was an expert in the music of ancient Egypt. And a witch. Christopher didn't believe in witches, but the woman had unnerved him, so when she made a pass at him, Christopher declined her advances. Soon after he got back home, he'd become convinced the woman had cursed him for turning her down, and that's when he told his friends his life hung in the balance. He left a message for me a week ago Monday, Sammy said shortly after Christopher's body was found. He said he was afraid and that the witch had been attacking him all night and cutting him.
Ooh.
He said he'd woke up with little cuts at the ends of his fingers.
That's scary.
Christopher told his friends he'd also wake in the morning to find his body covered in bruises, that there were shadows moving around his flat. He called another friend and said he was going to stay in a hotel for safety. He talked about hiring someone to confront the witch. Then there was the salt. Since the earliest of time, salt has been used as a protection against unwanted psychic phenomena. Christopher knew this from the books he'd been reading, so he used the salt along with the crucifixes in his flat for protection, and he clearly felt the threat was very real. But why had such a career-focused professional become so convinced he was cursed? No one knew who the mystery woman in San Francisco was. Was she really a powerful witch? It seems no one will ever know. Christopher took that secret to his grave. So, there you can see the obvious, strange circumstances surrounding his death. And I just kind of, I felt like I wanted to sort of talk about this because when I came across this story, actually a couple of days ago, I got the chills because I was like, this sounds to me like some kind of psychic attack was done on him. Someone, and we know that from various cultures, that there are stories of people, oftentimes shamans, wise men.
In Haiti with the voodoo.
Yeah, of people who seem to be able to exhibit some sort of supernatural abilities.
Now, the voodoo one is very fascinating because voodoo was started by the slaves, the African slaves that were brought to Haiti for the British.
But it's also important to know that voodoo itself is not a negative. It's not a negative practice.
It's not at all.
There's a misconception that people have, and mostly due to media, movies and things like that often paint voodoo as being a source of black magic, and its actually original purpose was used for healing purposes. For healing rituals, things like that. It was never meant,
One of the healing rituals that I saw in a documentary that was in Haiti is they have the voodoo priestess, which is usually a woman. And in this one ritual, she goes into a sort of hypnosis where she starts seducing all the men. She's supposed to represent the divine feminine. And what you see is all the men that are dancing around her, and she's doing her own thing, getting into a certain state of consciousness. She sort of represents the beauty of the divine. And all the men are being healed by this. And not just men, also other women are being attracted into that. Then there's sacrifices that take place. Sometimes they'll kill a chicken, and when she's in this state, but afterwards in this documentary, this woman that was doing this ceremony explained the healing, like you were saying, Sam, of how you seduce. There's the seduction that happens, and the men go into another state as well. That was just one of the rituals that I saw in this documentary. There's another one where they go to certain graves and they will smoke and pour rum. Rum is used in a lot of voodoo rituals because that was part of the slavery. And so voodoo is very fascinating also. We should elaborate more on that in another episode.
Right. So I just wanted to, and one more thing about that voodoo stuff. It's that that's not saying, too, that there aren't individuals that are able to twist voodoo and turn it into some sort of abomination. Mm-hmm. And maybe, in fact, can place curses on other people.
That's still dark magic.
Yeah, but again, don't you can't let that reflect on that religion as a whole.
Right.
It's just like any of these other religions.
Just
you can't,
like in Christianity.
Right, and again, yeah. I mean, it's like not all Christians are bad. Not all Jews are, I mean, it's one of those things you can't allow what a few weirdos, do reflect on the entire culture and religion. So with that being said, I just kind of wanted to talk about that. I thought it was a interesting, unexplainable case that to this day is still sort of unknown as to what happened to him. And again, if you like this podcast, if you want to hear more, let me know. Maybe, like I said in the last podcast, what we can do is maybe if you guys want to hear about a particular subject, you can tell me what you want to hear about, and we'll do a...
put it in the comments.
Yeah, put it in the comments. We'll take your suggestions under advisement, and I'll be putting this on YouTube at some point as well. So if you guys head over to my YouTube channel, Electric Panda, you can find that there. I'll let you guys know when I do that. And thanks for listening. We're gonna try and keep these podcasts hopefully between 10 minutes and 30 minutes. That's the format I want to follow. I think that having anything longer than that is kind of hard to sort of deal with right now. But I just want to give you guys a thanks if you're listening. Have a good day.